Good morning. Welcome to the Citizens Club of Springfield Policy Breakfast. We have a special program this morning on an economic study of CWLP, Dahlman Power Plant. I will not go into any details on that. Our special guests are Andy Knott. Andy is the Senior Campaign Representative for the Sierra Club based in St. Louis. Andy has worked some 32 years in the environmental protection area. I thank you for joining us today and getting Dr. Patolo to join us. So Andy, it's your program.
Great. Thank you, Bob. The Sierra Club is the nation's oldest and largest grassroots environmental organization, and as such, we have a very active local group of Sierra Club members here called the Sangamon Valley Group of the Sierra Club. And this group and its members, as well as staff folks who work for them, have been very active in the last few years on the issues surrounding the Dahlman coal plant that's owned by CWLP. The biggest example that I'll just briefly talk about is something that's been in the news lately, and that is the coal ash ponds around the power plant. When you burn coal, it generates coal ash. It has to be disposed of in some way, and what the utility has done for decades, and most utilities have done this, is that they place this ash in unlined ponds with water. And unlined meaning there's no barrier between the ash and the groundwater. And this has resulted in coal ash contains a lot of toxic constituents, and the groundwater monitoring around these ponds has shown significant contamination, arsenic, lead, cadmium, including one instance where it was the levels of arsenic were like 22 times the safe drinking water standard. So there have been hundreds of these violations monitored, and so that's the latest thing that we've been working on. But the reality is that these types of power plants, not only are they polluting, they also especially when they get older, they become uneconomic. So and there are 4 generating units at the plant. They range in, the 3 oldest ones range in age from 49 years old to 39 years old. So these older units we've always said are rapidly approaching the end of their useful life, especially the oldest 2. And so we hire experts on economics to look into these issues. And that's why we brought in Synapse Energy Economics and Dr. Vitolo. So I'm going to turn it over to him. Unfortunately, I left his bio in my bag over there. So Tommy, I'm going to just ask you to say a little bit about yourself, if you could. I apologize.
Okay. My name is Tommy Vitolo. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, and I work at a firm called Synapse Energy Economics. My background is in mathematical optimization. I spent a lot of time doing a lot of math, and eventually it got tricky, and I decided maybe I should not do math for the rest of my life. But I did get a PhD in operations research and went to work in the energy industry. And what I love about the energy industry is there are these complicated calculations, or these complicated problems where there's a lot of different choices, and you have to sort of tease through what are the choices that make sense, what are the optimum choices, the efficient choices. And so I work for a firm called Synapse Energy Economics, and maybe I'll tell you about it. Here we go. We've got a staff of about 30 consultants, and we work on electricity issues around the country and some international work, but primarily in the US. Because most electrical issues are done at a state level, we're all over the country. And I do expert testimony, and I write reports. And we ask questions like, should a new power plant be built here? Or what is the appropriate amount to pay for energy coming from this plant? Or what's the right way to structure the electric bill so that customers pay enough revenue to pay the utility, but are also making payments that are fair and reflecting the cost that each customer is imposing on the utility? And so there are lots of these economics and analytical kinds of questions that we look at all over the country. And every community is unique and every service territory is unique. But as you can imagine, there are some real common themes and real common tools for analysis because the electric grid is pretty similar across the country, right? We have an advanced grid where standards of engineering are high, and that exists all across the country. So we were asked to look at the Dahlman units and understand whether or not operating those Dahlman units was the least cost method of providing safe, reliable power to CWLP ratepayers. And we did a simple analysis using public information. And what we did was we said, well, Springfield is connected to the greater electric grid. It's well connected. There's lots of wires. If you get in the airplane, you look around, you see wires everywhere. And in fact, Springfield is part of the MISO grid. It's the Mid-Continent Independent Service Operator, and MISO North, the northern portion, runs roughly from Minnesota to Indiana, from the Canadian border down to the southern parts of Illinois and Ohio. And that's a pretty big area, so there's a lot of power plants there. What that means is that if the Dahlman plant didn't exist, the lights would still come on, every time. Dahlman is not needed for reliability. CWLP could be the exact same utility and serve its customers with the exact same level of quality without the Dahlman station. And that set up the question, well, what if the Dahlman station didn't exist? What if CWLP just bought the power from the wholesale marketplace? What if it had been doing that for years? What would the difference in price be? And so that's the question we sought to answer. And we did that with what's called an EBITDA analysis. That's for investing nerds. That's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And essentially what we're looking at is what's the cash coming in and what's the cash coming out, and is that positive or negative? And the analysis that we did is we said, well, what if we assumed that the cash coming in was not what ratepayers are paying, but rather what that electricity is worth on the wholesale market? Is it costing more to generate the electricity than it's worth, or is it costing less? Because if it's costing more to generate the electricity than that electricity is worth, then CWLP is losing money by generating that electricity. They'd have been better off just buying it from the market. If the electricity that CWLP is generating is worth more than the market, then CWLP is doing a great job by generating this electricity and selling it on the market. And so we did the analysis, and it turns out that for Dahlman 31, I'm just going to go through one of these, and then you can see all four. For Dahlman 31, the energy revenue, that's the value of the energy it created in millions of dollars, is along this top row. And this year it was out of service, but in 2009 and on, it operated. And over the 2008 to 2016 time frame, the electricity it generated, the energy, was worth $60.5 million on the wholesale marketplace. It also provides capacity, and that's its ability to serve load when load wants it. That's its reliability contribution, and that was worth another $6 million. So the operation of Dahlman 31 was worth $66.5 million on the marketplace, and that means that if you didn't have Dahlman 31, it would have cost you $66.5 million to buy those services. But what did it cost to operate Dahlman 31 during that time period? Well, the cost of coal was $49.4 million. The variable operating costs, which are the costs that go up as you operate it more and go down as you operate it less, other chemicals and other processes, were $14.1 million. And the fixed O&M cost, this is the cost that you have to pay if you operate the unit for 1 hour or for 8,000 hours. This is things like security at the plant, payment in lieu of taxes, right? These are costs that you're going to pay It's like if you have a vacation home, you got costs you're going to pay if you get out there 1 week or if you get out there 10 weeks. Those some costs you just got to pay. And those costs were $49 million. And so when we add all of this up over 2008 through 2016, it turns out that CWLP spent $46 million more to produce the energy and capacity than that energy and capacity was worth. Another way of saying that is if Dahlman 31 didn't exist and CWLP bought the output of Dahlman 31 off of the marketplace, it would have spent $46 million less to get the exact same product at the exact same time. And so we see this as an opportunity in the future to not spend $46 million more to get the exact same product. And so we can do this. This is actually Dahlman 32. I apologize. We have Dahlman 31, Dahlman 32, Dahlman 33, and Dahlman 4. And you'll notice in 2009 and on, every single one of these units, all 4 of them, lost to the marketplace every single year. 2008 was the last year in which operating these coal units made sense from a financial perspective. Now, if you're in 2009 or 2010 or 2011, it takes a little while to put these numbers together and to recognize, well, maybe this is an anomaly. Maybe the market's going to come back. The market's not going to come back. The reason why the market's not going to come back is because Dahlman is effectively competing with all of the other power plants in the MISO, in this huge region, including a whole bunch of natural gas plants. Everyone's heard hydrofracking. Very few people in this room would have heard of hydrofracking in 2008, right? And hydrofracking has pushed down the price of natural gas. And so those gas plants are putting out power at a lower price than Dahlman. Who here thinks fracking is going out of style? I don't. I think it's with us for quite a long time. That's going to keep the price of gas down. We see more and more wind turbines being built across the Midwest. Well, what do those wind turbine operators pay for the wind itself? Nothing, right? So those wind turbines are going to keep spinning and keep putting power on the grid. That's also going to keep the price of electricity on the marketplace down, which is great for everyone who's buying energy off the marketplace, but not so great if instead you're burning your own coal to operate your own plant at a loss. And so over the span of 9 years, including the profitable 2008 year, these 4 units over the span of 9 years have lost $261 million. And that's a lot of money. Had these 4 units not existed, had CWLP simply bought the energy and capacity from the marketplace, it would have spent $261 million fewer dollars to get the exact same electricity to all of their customers. That's the analysis that we did, and that is really the big finding. And here's what it looks like in a triangle, right? So 2008, we made some money, and every year after that, we lost money. And when you add up all those dollars, it's $261 million over the span of 9 years. And $261 million is a big number. It's almost as big as the unfunded firefighters and police pension fund in the city, right? It's a big number. But what is it? There's also a lot of customers, right? There's about 110,000 people who live in Springfield, and then there's a few customers outside of Springfield. What does it mean for individual customers, right? How does it spread out? And so we calculated the typical customer cost for residential customers per year, and for commercial customers, it fluctuates year to year, but these are all extra costs, and even that can be hard to understand. So what I did is I got my fingers on Bob Gray's electric bill. This is Bob's bill. In this particular month, which was somewhere in the spring, right, because it's on that summer-winter split, his household consumed 940 kilowatt hours in that month. Bob, go get a few LED bulbs and install them. You'll bring that down a little bit, save some money. But what he did is he spent $120.52 on his electric portion of his CWLP bill that month. And his lovely wife actually paid the bill. You can see her handwriting down at the bottom there. So the question is, well, what if these Dahlman units weren't operating in this month? What if CWLP was instead buying that energy and capacity from the market, what would this bill look like? This bill, Bob's bill. Well, Bob, it would be less. We would lower the price per kilowatt hour, which would lower the total, and now instead of $120, it's $100. So Bob, we just saved you $19.21 on this month's bill. This is a customer. This is a residential customer, a pretty typical customer. Bob's I would say a pretty typical guy in a lot of ways anyway. And we're talking about $20 a month for a residential customer. For a commercial customer, we're talking about $200 a month. Now, that doesn't mean that CWLP can or should just turn the plant off tomorrow. It can't because, well, it takes a little bit of planning to turn off a machine that big and to do it safely. There are some transmission or distribution, electrical engineering changes that have to be made because of the way the distribution system is wired through the plant. And there is some environmental consideration. When you close a plant down, you want to do it safely. You want to make sure that you're not leaking things into the groundwater or anywhere else. There's also personnel considerations, right? I would expect over 100 full-time equivalent employees at the Dahlman units. And these are members of the community. If this were a merchant plant, if this were a plant run by a private equity firm in Chicago or New York, they'd say to hell with them and give them pink slips. But this is a municipal light plant, and a municipal light plant doesn't have to do that. And I suspect if Springfield, Illinois is anything like my community, you all don't want them to do that. You want to take care of these employees. You want to make sure that you're thoughtful in how they transition. And I think that is done often in places that have municipal light plants. CWLP certainly wouldn't be the first municipal light plant to retire a plant. The good news in some ways is that there are 134 employees of CWLP that are at retirement age or within 5 years of retirement age. And the reason why that's such good news is that means if CWLP were to decide to retire, let's say Dahlman 31, 32, and 33 in the next 3 or 4 years, it can work with those employees and make sure they retire as the plant retires. Take care of those employees, not lay them off. Let them retire at the natural end of their career, just as CWLP is retiring Dahlman 31, 32, 33 at the natural end of its career. And it's not going to be perfect. There are going to be a few employees who aren't yet ready to retire. And maybe they can transition somewhere else in electric. Maybe they can transition to the water department, right? CWLP can be thoughtful about these employees and not have the kind of layoffs that Midwestern communities around the region have seen when large industrial facilities or factories close. It's not necessary here, but it requires planning, and that's something that we have not seen any public documents from CWLP about. Utilities typically have 20 or 25-year planning documents. They're called Integrated Resource Plans, or IRPs. And the utilities asking these questions: what does the future look like, and how do we make long-term decisions so that we can keep prices low over the next 20 or 25 years? To our knowledge, CWLP is not doing that. There's no public document that I was able to find that was a comprehensive plan for CWLP's operations in electric for the next 20 or 25 years. And so, the findings of this report are Dahlman is losing a bunch of money each and every year, and it's not going to get better. The finding that isn't in this report, but I think is worth pointing out, is CWLP isn't even planning on what to do over the next 20 or 25 years. And I think it's that lack of a long-term plan that makes it really unclear what to do. Even if these units are losing combined $35 million a year, what do we do about it? Well, without a plan, it's unlikely that CWLP will make prudent decisions that are in the best interest of their customers. And so, to recap, Dahlman 31 is losing money every year, Dahlman 32 is losing money every year, Dahlman 33 is losing money every year, Dahlman 4 is losing money every year. And without a plan, there's no reason to think that will ever change. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I suspect there'll be a couple of questions. May I suggest that, number one, they be questions, and secondly, they not be too long. We have a floating mic in the back, and Jim Donlin will be floating with the mic. So any questions? Let's open it up. We have plenty of time for discussion. Yes, go ahead.
You're looking at an 8 or 9 year period when electricity prices on the wholesale market had collapsed. Had you looked 20 years earlier, 30 years earlier, you're looking at a very short period of time. And you're also looking when electricity prices had collapsed on the wholesale market. My name's William Thomas Schaefer. I worked for CWLP for 36 years, the last 12 years of which I worked in the control room. You're looking at a very short window. The wholesale market for electricity prices absolutely collapsed along with everything else in the 2008, 2009 Great Recession we had. That's hardly a very long period of time to base these type of conclusions on that. Of course, you want coal-fired plants shut down. We understand that. But you're seizing on anything, I believe, that justifies shutting down coal-fired power plants. Had you looked at 20 years before 2008, 30 years before 2008, CWLP has to provide electricity to Springfield for much longer than an 8-year period. I believe you have an entirely different set of figures had you looked 20 or 30 years before 2008, something for comparison, rather than when the electricity prices had collapsed on the wholesale market.
So I'll make a few comments. The first is, you're absolutely right. The wholesale market, both the energy market and the capacity market didn't exist yet, but the energy market did collapse right around 2008. And it was a combination of cheap natural gas and flat sales. I suspect you're right. You're right. I did not do the analysis, but I would be shocked if the Dahlman units weren't profitable prior to 2008. Absolutely. This is not a 35-year critique of CWLP. In fact, the Dahlman 4 unit, there was, I think it's fair to say that CWLP was incredibly unlucky, because when folks started talking about building Dahlman 4, it looked good. The future was bright for energy production from a coal-fired power plant. By the time it came online, it was like buying a house just before the bubble burst, right? The bubble burst on the electricity market, and CWLP was stuck with this unit, Dahlman 4, this brand new shiny unit that wasn't making any money. The question that's important to ask is, what does 2018 and 2020 and 25 and 2030 look like? It doesn't matter in some ways that Dahlman has lost $261 million, because you're not getting it back. It's gone. The question is, what should you do going forward? Is it going to continue losing $35 million a year to the marketplace on average, or is the future somehow different than the most recent 9 years? What I can tell you is that the AEO, American Energy Office, studies the prospects of energy, not just electricity, but all energy for the country, and they do all kinds of analysis. Annual Energy Outlook, excuse me. The Annual Energy Outlook, it's this annual report of what is the 25-year future of energy in America? Oil, electricity, natural gas, the works. And it's done by the Department of Energy's Energy Information Office. They think, and all of the private forecasters think, that the price of natural gas is going to stay low for the next 10 or 20 years, at least. They also think that the price of building new wind and solar will continue to decline. They also think that sales, the consumption of residents and commercial establishments and industry, is going to stay flat in this region, not grow. And so when you have cheap natural gas and you have more wind and solar coming online, providing extremely cheap energy as well, and you don't have increasing sales, you don't have increasing demand, well, anyone will tell you when supply goes up and demand stays the same, prices go down, right? And so the future of the MISO energy market is going to be continued very low energy prices and low capacity prices. So the future of MISO looks like the past 9 years. You're right that 9 years is a short period of time relative to the operation of the units. Absolutely. But what's most important is that the future, the next decade or two, look like the most recent decade. And so at some point, someone has to say, it was a great plant, it was doing a great job, it was meeting the community's needs. Is it still doing that? And do we think it'll do that in the future? And if the answer is it's not still doing that because we could get the same output from the market for less, and in the future we will continue to be able to get the same output from the market for less, then the natural question is, what benefit is it to the community to spend $35 million a year more for power than it needs to?
Next.
Thank you for the presentation. So if I understand this correctly, with the advantage of hindsight, it did not make dollars and cents to build Dahlman 4.
You know, with the advantage of hindsight, a lot of things in our lives would be different, right? And so I think maybe a better question, I think that's true, but I don't think that's especially helpful, right? We all make good decisions that turn out badly. I think if we go back 10 years and we ask the question, hey, given what CWLP and the rest of the local and electrical community knew at the time about the future price of energy, about the price of different commodities, about future environmental policy, about all of these things, was it a prudent decision to build Dahlman 4, right? I think that's a more important question, because we all make good decisions that work out badly, and that doesn't mean we made a bad decision. Now, I do not know if when we go back into 2007 in our time machine, if it was prudent to build Dahlman 4 or not. I have not studied, the data from that perspective. We can say in hindsight it was a mistake. But I am not prepared at this time to say CWLP made a mistake in building that plant. I suspect Andy might say, they shouldn't have built it, because you're right, Andy doesn't like coal-fired power, and he didn't 10 years ago either. I think that's true. I don't think that's controversial. But from a financial perspective, should CWLP have built that plant? I'm not sure that it was or wasn't the right decision. I'm not prepared to assert that. And I think that's really the important question, right? We all make decisions that don't work out. That doesn't mean we had a bad decision. Now, if we do have a flawed decision-making process, well then, yeah, we do want to say, how can we make that process better so when we make a big decision next time, we get a better outcome? That we should always be doing, right?
Go ahead.
So what we've got here is a municipal, and I had a little chance to talk to Tommy before the meeting, and there are special attributes to municipals that allow us some flexibility, I would say, or allow us some input from the community that might help in this overall evaluation that the city now needs or could now make, given some of this information. You spoke about planning. We've got a lot of business leaders in the audience here. How might the community contribute to doing the evaluation and doing the heavy lift of figuring out where we go from here? I mean, this is difficult news for everybody. Nobody's been missing the fact that the energy market has been doing what it is, but Tommy, can you talk a little bit about the planning process, how the community
Sure.
can be a part of that? I understand perhaps you're a local official yourself, so you understand.
I am.
this.
That's true. I am a locally elected legislator in my town. In New England, we have this sort of crazy form of government called town meeting, and my town of 60,000 people has 240 elected legislators, and I'm one of them. We don't get paid anything, and there's one for every 200 adults in the town. It's a very community process. If this plant were owned by ComEd or by Ameren, the Public Utility Commission would be paying very close attention, and the Consumer Advocate, which I don't recall in Illinois if it's the Attorney General or if there's a different department. In Illinois, it's actually the Commerce Commission, right, is the Public Utility Commission. They'd be keeping a close eye on it, and the Consumer Advocate would have been screaming about this years ago. But municipal electric plants are a different animal, and they're a different animal because the expectation from state government is that the local community is going to keep a close eye on things, and the local community is going to act in its own best interest. Because there's no profit motive from a corporation, it's expected that local government is going to work to solve local problems. And the consequence of that is the professionals who think about problems like this and see different utilities in the state behave aren't bringing their experience to this problem. You don't have that experience here. And so the question is, what does the community do to help? Well, there are two things. The first thing is, you know, I believe there's tremendous power in small d democracy, people showing up and people making noise and telling their elected and appointed officials what the community wants out of the process. And so, you know, I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. You all are here on a Friday morning because you care enough about your community and this issue to be here and to hear a point of view. And so that's important, and I expect that folks will do that. The other thing that's important is because a municipal electric plant has so much more flexibility to make good decisions, to make bad decisions, to make decisions using a broader set of criteria, it's important that the community tell CWLP what the community's vision is for the future of CWLP. If this were an investor-owned utility, for example, we wouldn't be able to say no layoffs. That's not allowed, right? You can't just keep employees on if it adds to the bills. But a municipal light plant can say, we don't have to lay anybody off. We can move some folks to other parts of the utility. We can, you know, do some early retirement and make sure that the folks who retire a few years early have a little more in that nest egg to carry them through retirement. The city could say, we ended up with 6 or 7 employees that are too young to retire and aren't needed in the water department. We're going to put them on the tree planting division of CWLP and plant trees for a couple of years. The community has a lot of flexibility in how it wants to handle not just the employees, but how it wants to move forward. If the community, for example, believes that rooftop solar is the way to go forward, then the community can say, CWLP, we want net metering and we want subsidies and we want technical help to put rooftop solar in our community. But that's up to the community, right? You all have to figure out what it is that you want from you want reliability, you want safety. I'm going to assert that. Nobody here has said that, but I'm telling you guys, you want reliability and you want safety. I don't think that's controversial. You probably want the bills to be lower. We all want that. And Bob, your bill could be $20 lower. Bob wants that. So does his wife. And so the opportunity is for the community to contribute both to the near term, hey, let's do good planning and make a good decision, and also to speak about what the community wants from its utility, the utility that it owns going forward.
Andy, would you weigh in?
If I could just say a little bit about good planning. So in the last couple of weeks, I think it was last week actually, CWLP had a public forum, and the utility director said at that meeting that they would be making a decision on retiring units 31 and 32 in the next year. And of course, that is something we've been advocating for, and it's very we're very pleased that that is the direction that they're heading. And I think that the importance of planning is, as Tommy said earlier, it's like what happens next. What is the long-range plan for Unit 33 in particular, which is Unit 33 is only 6 years younger than Unit 32, so they're all in roughly the same age range. 2 examples in Springfield, Missouri, the utility there, which is a municipal utility, just released in April a 20-year long-range plan, one of these integrated resources plans that Tommy mentioned. I have a copy of it in my bag over here along with Tommy's bio. So if you want to see it later, I'll give it to you. But it's a very good plan, and it lays out when they're going to retire their next coal unit, which is a ways off. They've already retired 5 units at that utility. And it also lays out how they're going to invest more in renewables and energy efficiency and battery. They're actually doing a big battery storage project in Springfield right now. So, so it's a good plan, and did they involve the public in that? Not the greatest job, but this is the first one that they've done, and they said in the plan the next time in 2 years they're going to involve the public more. That's one example. Another one is a regulated utility, Ameren, Missouri. I work in Missouri as well, primarily. Ameren, Missouri, a week from today, is going to release its next 20-year integrated resources plan. And there is a process, again, as Tommy said, it's regulated, and there are laws about this in Missouri. And it's required that the public has input. So there's going to be a comment period. Organizations and individuals can intervene in that process and be very officially involved in it. So I think that there's, CWLP has an opportunity here to really come up with how to do planning right by looking at Springfield, Missouri, maybe improving on the public input process that they should have had and that they're planning on having, as well as what other utilities do like Ameren and what the laws require in terms of really involving the public. So I think that this could be a good test case in Springfield, Illinois on what to do, how to do good planning.
Good morning. You guys have touched on what I want to talk about in answering some other questions, but not as directly as I'm going to try to pull it. You're very convinced that the energy market is not going to come back or the prices are not going to rise. I think we all know that predicting commodity prices, which electricity has some risk involved. For some time now, there haven't been anybody building any new power plants, which presents a little bit of a risk because we have so many power plants around the country that are at end of life cycles, and we're going to find that in the coming future, and I don't know if it's 5, 10 years, 15 years, we're going to see the retirement of a lot of plants. It seems likely that let me also add into there, the reason those plants aren't being built is from an investor standpoint, they can't make any money at these lower prices. True, natural gas is a little bit less, and the fuel cost of a renewable energy, it can be at zero, but then there's the cost of implementing them and starting from scratch. I'd like for you to talk about why your conviction is that the prices are absolutely not going to rise when we can see that in the not too far future we're going to be retiring a lot of electricity generation that we currently enjoy, and there's currently no incentive for investors to build new plants. Seems likely that the prices are going to rise at some point not too far off.
Sure. So I'm going to disagree a little bit with your characterization. There are significant new plants coming online, gas plants. Combined cycle gas plants are being built, not just in the Midwest, but around the country. And additionally, new wind and new solar coming online. And those are also putting energy into the energy market, which keeps the prices down. And so it's true we've got retirements on the horizon. MISO less so than your neighbor to the east, PJM, which is essentially sort of Ohio, a little Chicago area of Illinois, and then Ohio and eastward toward the coast. They've got more retirements certainly than MISO does. But if you look at the balancing of coming offline and coming online from a plant basis, there actually isn't this massive exodus of generating capacity from the MISO North marketplace. The new gas coming online and the tremendous amounts of wind coming online in places like Minnesota and Iowa, and in some cases in Indiana and Illinois, we don't see a reduction in supply going forward. We see the new plants coming online being more than enough to compensate for the plants coming offline. It's true that there's risk in forecasting commodities, and it's true that there's a capital cost associated with building a new wind farm. But for the wind farms that exist and for the wind farms under construction, we do know their operating cost going forward. It's very cheap. You got to oil the turbine, you got to, keep it operating, but you don't pay for the fuel. And so that downward pressure on the energy market is going to exist because those plants aren't subject to commodity fuel price risk. Gas certainly is, but gas is so much cheaper than coal, particularly an older unit like Dahlman, that even if gas were to go up 10 or 20%, it would still be cheaper than coal. So the places to look are the AEO, the Annual Energy Outlook, which is, again, a federal report. And they run a variety of sensitivities. What if the price of natural gas goes up? What if there are more environmental regulations or less environmental regulations? What if the economy grows gangbusters? Or what if the economy suffers again? And if you look through all of their permutations, you'll see there are very few futures in which the wholesale price of natural gas grows faster than inflation.
Andy?
Yeah, I just want to add, back to the Springfield, Missouri example, their long-range plan, their consultant, they actually hired the Energy Authority to do their plan. They ran 9 different modeling scenarios for the next 20 years, and all of them resolved in renewable energy being the cheapest form of energy to add to their system in the future. So that's what they're doing. In fact, they just issued a request for proposals. They already have 250 megawatts of wind. They just issued an RFP for 100 more. They're probably going to sign that in the next few weeks or months. They're also in a slightly different geographic location in terms of being closer to Oklahoma, where there's a lot of good wind, but there's also a lot of good wind being built in Illinois right now.
Doctor?
Yeah, just a quick question on the other, when you talked about turning off, shutting down some or all of these units, there's a cost there involved that in terms of, it's just not a matter of turning off the switch and we suddenly got $31 million more in the budget or $31 million less expenditures. So, how significant are those costs? What kind of time frames? I mean, just the idea that we're going to have, a water park over where the CWLP campus is anytime soon is probably not realistic. So, what's involved with shutting a plant down, and what kind of cost considerations is that for when we do the planning, when we make the decision making?
Sure, that's a great question. And again, when the discussion about retiring the units becomes one of when, the retirement questions become much more important in setting that schedule. So I have not seen a CWLP study of the cost of retiring units 31, 32, and 33. I would estimate, and this is a real ballpark estimate, $10 to $20 million seems on the high side. That's much more expensive than the cost to retire many other coal plants. But as a conservative estimate, it might be $10 or $20 million. Now, the units are not going to live forever. They have to be retired eventually. They're at the end of their useful life. Whether or not they get retired in 2021 or 2031, there's still going to be the same cost to retire them. So in a sense, the moment you build the plant, you're committing to paying to retire them. The money has to get spent. The only question is when you choose to spend the money. And of course, retirement costs are capital costs, and so they need not be paid for in cash. They can be bonded. But to the extent that the cost of retirement eats up 1 or even 2 years of savings, well, look forward to year 3, right? The retirement costs are small relative to the cumulative savings of retiring the units. They're real. They have to be planned for. CWLP, I expect, will say they will drive up rates, and it will in the immediate sense, but what's going to push down rates is saving money by not operating those units, and that savings will go on indefinitely.
Jim?
In reference to the question about power going up because a lot of plants will be closing down, you also have a lot of individuals who are investing in solar. My husband and I invested in solar last November. We put a solar system on our garage that would meet our electric needs, annual electric needs of 10 megawatt per year, and our system's been in place since late November of 16, and it's already made over 9 megawatts of electricity. So our electric bill has been $17 since March. And so you have a lot of individuals that are investing in solar on their homes. And that goes back into the grid. What we overproduce goes back into the grid for the utility to turn around and sell on the open market. So, it's not just large utilities that are investing in wind and solar, but individuals are investing in wind and solar too. And so, Rural Electric has invested in solar in southern, south of here and in Pike County, I believe, as well. And so, there's a lot of investment in Illinois in wind and solar, and I see it as just continuing to grow.
My question is a little bit technical. I teach economics at UIS. Just have a question on your table 3 from this report. You list the excess cost of the 4 different Dahlman units compared to the wholesale, and then you add them up to get the total of 2 cents per kilowatt hour savings.
That's right.
So just if you shut down 33, you would save 0.26 kilowatt hours, 2 cents per kilowatt hour for the electricity that it's no longer generating, buying it from the grid. So it seems to me that you ought to have a weighted average of those 4 and not adding them all up to get 2 cents.
So I understand the question. But no, they're cumulative because each of the units is imposing a cost. The more of the units you close, the more of the savings you get. And the way we came up with this number was to look at the total difference in revenue associated with each of the 4 units and essentially divide it by the output of that unit. So each 4 of these units are calculated separately, and the total savings is the savings of the parts.
So you divide it over the total output for CWLP, not over just the output for that plant.
For each unit's assessment is done separately.
But your denominator is total kilowatt hours for the plant, for the system, not just for that plant. That would then say you could add up those 4.
We can talk offline. I'm happy to work through it with you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the cost-benefit analysis. There's national discussion always in division of governments and trying to, break down the governments into smaller pieces, for lack of a better word right now. CWLP has been a pillar in our community and provided jobs and great benefit to us. So I guess I'm wondering, in what you're describing, if we are moving towards this national grid for whatever that means, how does that impact local control over the cost and benefits? I mean, for example, Sierra Club has been involved many, many times in litigation, and we have seen locally how we have invested in lawsuits and to defend ourselves and so forth, and consultant fees. I guess I'm not really understanding then how we retain our local power when we move to this national grid.
Sure. To be clear, it is a regional grid, and you've already moved there. You've been participating in the MISO marketplace for at least a decade, right? So I'm not arguing that you should move there. You're there. You're participating in it every hour of every day. Whether or not Dahlman operates, you will continue to participate in every hour of every day. That's not going to change. It's true you have local control over your power prices, and by exerting your local control, you are choosing to spend more for power than you would otherwise. That is local control. You have certainty in your prices. You're certain to spend about $30 million a year more than you would otherwise, right? And so there is value in that certainty. I don't think that, I don't know, you guys pay CWLP bills, I don't. I would rather have a bill that was on average $20 lower, maybe some months 15, some months 25 lower. And I'd be willing to live with the uncertainty of those fluctuations if every bill was lower. And so what we're suggesting is, in this report, is that Dahlman has lost money each unit each year in the past 8 years, will continue to do so. There's some uncertainty year to year on how much it's going to lose. But the response to that is is the rational response to that is not, let's go ahead and lock in losing money every year so we know how much it's going to cost. That's not a response that I think most customers would make. And you're absolutely right, CWLP is an employer in this community and an important one. But it's also the case that every dollar that a customer sends to CWLP, it's not spending on a local business, which could be hiring people, right? Every business that shuts down because the totality of all their costs, including the additional $2,300 a year they're paying for electricity than they would otherwise, that business is now not contributing to the economy. And so, there's a balance there. And I think that, as I said, it's important for CWLP to provide safe, reliable power at costs that are as low as CWLP can get them under sort of reasonable operating parameters. And it doesn't look like CWLP has been doing that with regards to operating Dolman Station.
Where's Jim?
It's over there.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. You said correctly that increases in capacity and supply actually have a downward effect on pricing for natural gas. In addition, over the last decade or so, there have been new purchasing options, contracting options, which exert a substantial risk management function that are going to keep prices low probably for the next 2 decades. My question is, with the current administration's focus on decreasing regulation of coal mining, putting coal mining jobs back in place, I guess is what they talk about, do you see any type of cost mitigation in the coal industry that are going to affect your calculations?
I'm gonna assume that you mean the federal administration when you say the current administration, because obviously coal mining is impacted by federal, state, and local regulations. But the federal regulations that come through the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, are not signing statements by presidents. They're not easily changed. It takes any change in EPA regulation of this kind takes years. Often longer than a single presidential administration. And maybe President Trump gets reelected and he has 8 years to give a go at this, maybe not. But there's not going to be a sudden change in coal mining regulation. It's strictly not possible. Federal laws preclude that. Furthermore, the cost of environmental compliance at a coal mine is not the driving force behind the price of coal. It's the cost of either the manpower or the heavy equipment used to no longer need the manpower. Nationally, there's some shipping costs. The Viper mine isn't located very far from here, so the shipping costs aren't tremendous in this particular case. But even if there were a dramatic rollback of the environmental protections associated with coal, and even if Donald Trump said we're no longer going to export coal outside of the country, so we'll have more for us, I don't believe it would have a substantial impact on reducing the price of coal. And a good place to look for that is, again, the AEO, the Annual Energy Outlook, does have price sensitivities for coal. Under a circumstance where everything lines up and the price is pushed downward, just how low does it go? And the answer is not that much lower.
One brief.
Andy, you mentioned about the coal ash pond. Are there alternatives to that type of storage? And also, you mentioned that there had been hundreds of violations cited. So who cited those, and what was the intention behind the sightings?
Yeah,
Thank
you. Good question. So the best practice in terms of disposing of coal ash waste is in what's called a dry landfill. In other words, again, the main practice for a lot of utilities over the years has been to put them in these ash ponds where the ash would settle to the bottom and they're online. So the best thing to do is to build a landfill that is in a dry location, not in a floodplain, for example, as the Dolman ash ponds are, but build it in a dry location. You have a liner. The best kind of liner is sort of like a liner at a regular landfill, a municipal landfill, a thick plastic liner. and then there's a cap on top of that to keep it dry. So that's the best practice. Your other question was?
Who's making the citations?
Oh, who's making the citations? Yeah. So, CWLP is required to monitor the groundwater around the ash ponds, and they have 6 monitoring locations. They're groundwater wells, and a few times a year they take samples, and so then they report those results to the Illinois EPA. So I was citing self-reported data from the utility to the Illinois EPA. Again, it was 623 violations at those 6 wells between 2010 and I think 2016.
I think we'll wrap up. I want to give each of the speakers about a minute to kind of say whatever you want to wrap up. How wonderful it was to visit Springfield.
Well, it is wonderful.
And the very intelligent questions that our group.
Both of those things are true. You know, when I come to Springfield, I go out. I went out last night and I had a few beers, and I only pay in $5 bills and pennies, but nobody locally gets the joke. No, I love coming to Springfield. I've been here 3 times in the last few years, and I really enjoy, you know, being in downtown Springfield. The old brick buildings, and being from Boston, folks are a little bit more relaxed here and a little bit more friendly and welcoming. And I don't mind that at all, right? That's great. So I really enjoy coming out here. You know, we talked about Dahlman a good bit. I'm not making the case that CWLP was wrong to build the units. What I'm making the case is that those decisions have happened, and any bonds that still have to be paid for those units are going to be paid. Whether or not the plants exist, you got to pay back those bonds. The question is CWLP going to continue throwing good money after bad? Is it going to continue operating as if it were 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, when the fundamentals of our economy and the energy industry have changed? I think that the answer is going to be no. I think CWLP is going to say we cannot keep losing this kind of money to the marketplace. It's hurting our customers, and CWLP exists for the benefit of its customers. There are no investors to take those profits. So I'm optimistic that CWLP is going to sit down and really think through what are some long-term options, and come to the conclusion that continuing to operate these units, especially 31 through 33, is just not in the best interest of the ratepayers. And then they will come up with a plan over maybe a half a decade on how to transition the operations of CWLP, the reliability for the community, and the employment for those personnel. How to transition all of those so that ratepayers pay less and don't sacrifice reliability. And I think that's what's going to happen. Ultimately, as you asked, it's up to you all to make that happen one way or another. I can only write a report once in a while and come back and visit, get another horseshoe down at Darcy's.
There you go. Andy?
Yeah, I would just say, just reemphasize the importance of planning, and especially long-term planning that also really takes into consideration the transition of the workforce. Sierra Club has worked all around the country on these kinds of plans where coal plants are retiring. We've worked with local unions to develop these kinds of transition plans, and it really does take a community to figure out how to do this right. You know, we really care about workforce issues. Elizabeth and I are actually members of a union in the Sierra Club. Elizabeth Scrafford is our local staff person here. So we get it, and we want to make sure that as the utility moves forward, that the whole community is taken care of, including the important workforce. And I just want to thank Bob again for having us. Whenever I'm in Springfield on a Friday at this time of the month, I try to get over here, and I really enjoy the Citizens Club. I think it's just an excellent example of citizen involvement. I think it shows that there is demand for interest in community planning, including the utility. So thank you for doing this every month.
Good. Please thank Dr. Vitolo and Mr. Knott for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
That ends our meeting.